the next material that I want to talk about is whether or not you should even believe a statistical study when you see one. So, and the truth of the matter is that, I don't know, maybe somebody says something like, oh, well, statistics show, I love that, statistics show, and then, I don't know, maybe it's 8 out of 9 dentists prefer Colgate over Crest or whatever. Okay, so, but they'll say something like that, well, statistically speaking, blah, 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 blah. And, you know, maybe they're just throwing numbers out at you, and maybe they don't know anything at all about what's going on. Or maybe they actually have done their research, and there's a reason we should listen to them. So we don't know what category that falls in until we actually do some fact checking of our own. And so that's what we need to know. We need to always check. Okay, don't just believe statistics blindly just because somebody said it. So there are actually 8 guidelines, and I will upload 8 guidelines for critically evaluating a study. Critically evaluating a statistical study. Okay, and I'll upload that in D2L so that you can see it. Okay, but because I've got a nice scan of it, I'll upload it. It'll be easy for you to do. But the stuff that's in the list, the 8 different things that you should be looking at, are things like get a big picture of the study. Okay, so know what they're doing, know what their goals are, know what their population is. How did they pick their sample? How do you know such and such? What did you do to draw your conclusions? So we need to get a big picture of the study. So an example of this would be there was a study where researchers gave, quote, 100 participants their individual astrological horoscopes and asked whether they were accurate or not. Okay, so I give you your horoscope and I say, here's what it says, is that accurate? Okay, well, the problem with that is that, and by the way, 85% of people said that horoscope is accurate. Yes, that describes me. Okay, so you tell me what the problem is of this when we're talking about horoscopes. And in my brain, I hear you saying, it's very subjective. Okay, maybe I see myself as fiery and feisty, but somebody else might see me as belligerent or something like that. So there's different ways for something to be interpreted, right? And what do you know about horoscopes? They're generally kind of vague and say stuff like, oh, you know, I don't know, a Taurus is a go-getter or something like that, right? So they're kind of vague. And if you're looking at a daily horoscope, it might say, oh, get your umbrella out, it's likely to rain today. And you're just like, really? And of course, if it does rain, then ta-da, they got it right. And if it doesn't rain, then, oh, well, we meant, you know, metaphysically it's going to rain, you know. So it's very subjective, it's very squishy, so to speak. So that's difficult. But the real thing is that if I just say, is your horoscope right, then I'm treating that as what? An observational study. Okay? And the truth of the matter is that this probably shouldn't be an observational study. If you want to know if horoscopes are correct or not, and you want to find out if people really identify with them, then maybe you should give 100 people their actual horoscope, but maybe you should give 100 other people a fake horoscope. Okay, what would that be doing? That would be creating a treatment group and a control group, right? So then I would be able to see, oh, does everybody just always say that they agree with it? Or are we looking at other stuff? And quite frankly, horoscopes aren't really something I need to study anyway, so it's kind of a weird one for us to have up there. So, okay. All right, number 2 is consider the source. Okay, there's actually a very well-known study And I want to say that it's from the 60s, maybe the 70s, that says smoking is good for you. Okay, that's the conclusion that they drew. And so, you know, by 1963, we already knew smoking is bad for you. The Surgeon General of the United States had already said, hey, stop smoking, it's bad for you. However, there were a few studies that said there's no danger from smoking, and there's even one that says something to the effect of people who smoke live long lives. So basically, they were trying to say it had a benefit for you, which we know that's not true. It's really not beneficial. The problem is that when you go back and you look at the studies, and again, you get the big picture and you consider the source, the problem is that the people who were paying for this study were from the tobacco, well, it was done by the Tobacco Research Institution. Okay, Tobacco Research Institute. And guess who funded the Tobacco Research Institute? Why, it was cigarette companies. Okay, cigarette companies. All right, well, think about that for a second. If you're a cigarette company and you're funding the Tobacco Research Institute and you want to know if smoking is good for people or not, or if it's bad for their health or not, then they say, oh, it's really bad for people's health, they should all stop smoking. Are you going to keep on funding that institute? No, you're not, of course. This is a clear conflict of interest, right? This cigarette company should not at all be funding something like that. This should be going through some kind of third party that has nothing at all to do with cigarettes. However, if I fund you, Tobacco Research Institute, then it's kind of understood, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, that you should make sure that cigarettes are good for me. So what happened was they were very unethical in their research, and some of them, for instance, maybe they researched people and they had 100 people who all lived to 70 plus years old, and they all smoked every day of their lives. And they're like, you know, when you talk to some of those older people like that and you say, oh my goodness, you've been smoking for 50 years and you're still alive, and they'll be like, yep, good genes or something like that. But the fact was that they surveyed people sometimes, some of the studies, they surveyed people who had been smoking for 50 years, but they didn't smoke, and they were in fine health, and they were maybe in their 70s, that kind of thing. But they didn't go and find people who had smoked for only a year or two and then died of lung cancer, okay? Or they didn't go and talk to people who had emphysema and all those kinds of things. So it was not a representative sample. It was not statistically accurate. So you have to watch out. Sometimes the studies weren't even peer reviewed, like nobody was there to check on them. The potential for bias is there. We really have to go in and look and make sure what's going on. Okay, number 3, look for bias. Number 3, look for bias. We talked about bias the other day. Okay, in particular, we're looking for bias in the sample here. So we want to see if the people who are taking the survey or the people who are doing whatever, if they have any reason where they might favor one outcome over the other. And there's actually 3 different kinds of bias, and we're going to talk about them now. One is selection bias. Okay, so when you have something that's selection bias, the question becomes, how did those people get picked, selected? how did we pick our subjects for our study, our participants? Okay, how do we pick them? Okay. So a selection bias would happen whenever a researcher selects their sample in some kind of biased way. And it doesn't have to be deliberate. Okay. It could be, for instance, whenever I was doing my favorite color survey, and I selected my sample based on, oh, there's a big group of people standing over there, let me go interview them all. And it turned out that everyone in the study was from the same group, maybe. Okay, so in other words, if I interviewed the entire football team just because they happened to be around, it was very convenient for me, but it only tells me the favorite color of men in a certain age group and that kind of thing, like with certain interests in athletics and things like that. So it's not necessarily going to pick up my band people or my ag people or my sorority girls or anything like that, right? So I'm having a problem with my sample, and it's not because I'm being mean or malicious or anything like that. It's because those are the people who were there, and it's not representative. Okay, so we have to make sure to get a sample from various groups. I need all of the groups to be represented. Okay, so if, for instance, on the A&M Commerce campus, we have a pretty big international student population. I haven't mentioned that in this class yet. So we have a big international student population. We have a big Chinese group, a big Thai group, a big Indian group. So from India, so Nepal, we've got all kinds of different international students. So if my entire group here that I sampled, if none of them are international, then I probably have an issue with selection bias because I haven't included that group. Okay, that's what selection bias is. It means I selected it wrong. I picked my people, my sample, poorly. So we have to watch out for that. Okay, number 2, participation bias. Okay, now this is slightly different. Okay, this actually happens based on whenever people volunteer for something. Okay, so I am a participant, and the fact that I chose to participate means that there could be some form of bias. So this happens when participation is voluntary. And I'll give you an example. Okay. If you go to ratemyprofessor.com and you look at people, particular feedback or whatever, you're probably going to get 2 things. Okay, for instance, if you look at, I don't know, Miss Newton, who's one of our really popular faculty members here on campus at A&M Commerce, and you will probably see 2 different things. One will be people who say, I give her a 5, she's amazing, she does this, she does that, she's totally amazing, she's cool, blah, blah, blah. And then there's going to be another group of people probably that give her a 1, okay, which 5 is the highest, 1 is the worst. Okay, so they would give her a 1 and say, well, she's never available, and she's this, and she's that, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, the problem with that is you have to take both viewpoints with a grain of salt, right? When you go to ratemyprofessor.com and you put in that information, yep, it's a piece of data, okay? It's a little piece of data that tells me something about that professor, but you volunteered that. And let's be honest, who's going to ratemyprofessor.com and putting in reviews? It's probably people who either really, 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 really like that person that was teaching them, or somebody who really, really, really didn't like that person who was teaching them. In fact, sometimes we'll see negative ratings come up right after a test because people are mad because they didn't do well, and they don't own the fact that maybe I didn't study. Okay, maybe I could have done this, maybe I could have done that, and they want to blame somebody. So you have this participation bias where somebody just chooses to go online. Well, they probably have a really definite opinion one way or the other. You're probably not getting ratemyprofessor.com from, say, a B or a C student who's just like, yeah, I floated through the class and I was good and they were nice enough, and they're probably not going to be passionate enough to go online and try to do a ratemyprofessor.com. So that's one of those things. Another really common one right now that you'll see is Yelp. Okay, you'll go and you'll look at the Yelp rating for a particular restaurant or something like that, and I'm telling you, there will be 4s and 5s, 5s and 4s, 4s and 5s, and then all of a sudden there will be 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and it's like the whole group of people who went on a particular day and there was bad service and da 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 da. So it's either people who really like that restaurant or they really don't like that restaurant, and you'll see that a lot. It's probably not somebody given a bunch of 2s and 3s. Okay. So that's participation bias. Okay, so the third kind of bias that could be out there, and we have to watch out for this one, is researcher bias. Okay, and hopefully the name is giving you a little bit of an idea about what's going on. This is the situation where if I'm interviewing people and I have a particular opinion, I have to watch myself that I'm not giving a researcher effect, right? That I'm not biasing the results one way or another. So this is when the person doing the study, the researcher, has an opinion and somehow it affects, oh my goodness, it affects the outcome. You have to really watch out for that, okay? And we've talked about that a little bit already, so I'm not going to go really deep into that one, but yeah, you've got to watch out for that. A situation, yeah, I already talked about that. With the antidepressant drugs, if I'm in the room and I know that this person got the medicine, I'm like, you feel better, don't you? Yeah. So it's not that I would necessarily be trying to bias the outcome, but it might happen. So, yeah. Okay, number 3 is look for bias in your sample. And number 4, problems defining the variables. I'm just going to kind of run through these. Problems defining variables. You have to watch out for that. The horoscope one that I mentioned just a little bit ago might be a study where I have a problem defining a variable. It might be difficult to say what percentage of the time this horoscope fits my personality. So it might be difficult to measure that. Okay, so I got to watch out for that. Number 5, look out for confounding variables. We mentioned those the other day in the other lesson. A confounding variable is something that I just didn't know happened. Like if I was doing the tutoring study and somebody's brother was tutoring them on the sly and I didn't know it. It's not that, I was trying to get by with saying this person did such and such and such and such. It's just that I didn't know. Maybe in my tomato study, if those bugs came in and ate all my good tomatoes, I didn't know that that was going to happen. I wasn't trying to see something like that. It just happened. So we have to watch out for that. Okay. So watch out for confounding variables. Number 6 is consider the wording in your survey. So some of these are a little specific. So if you have a survey in your study and you want to be able to make sure that it's not biasing in one direction or another. I want to look for the wording and check for anything that might tend to produce an inaccurate response or a dishonest response. So I'll tell you one of those things like this. If I had a survey and I stood outside of a bathroom, and I was waiting for people to come out, and I said, hey, did you wash your hands? You know, they might have a reason to tell me they did even if they didn't. So you have to watch out for that, right? It might be that I have a survey that says, hey, do you want tax cuts? Do you want lower taxes? Well, everybody wants lower taxes, but if I don't word it properly, then I have to watch out for that. There's always a consequence for lower taxes, right? So I'm going to give you lower taxes, but you're not going to be able to get any of the streets in Commerce fixed, where there are potholes in Commerce that need fixed. So that might be an issue. Or, okay, we'll give you lower taxes, but you don't get any medical insurance or this or that. So there's different things I got to watch out for whenever I'm doing these particular survey wordings. So don't lead anything to dishonesty or to bias in one direction or the other. I want everything to be valid, right? Okay, not inaccurate. Check that your results are presented fairly. Okay, so when I'm finished with the whole thing, I've done all my studies, and I've done all my statistics, and I've number crunched, and everything's ready to go. I want to make sure at the end of the thing that I say accurately what was really happening in the study. So I don't want to lean it in one direction or the other. I want to check whether the study really supported the conclusions that were made. I want to make sure that I've, gone back and looked at the purposes of the study, the goals. Did the conclusions make sense? Have I done it correctly? All that kind of stuff. So just be careful and fair. That's the thing there. Okay. And then the last one is stand back and consider your conclusions. Okay, because at some point we have to infer something. We have to draw conclusions. So stand back and consider your conclusions. You want to evaluate whether or not your study has achieved its goals. And I want to make sure that my conclusions make sense and they have significance for what's going on. So I don't want to just throw things out there and be like, yeah, it's cool, whatever, this is what we got. Okay. So actually be insightful and take some time to think about what you're showing people. That's what you need to be doing. Okay. So, I think that's about it for this section. I want to give one little example so we can talk about it, but then we'll go on from there. So one of the examples I have is that the school board in Boulder, Colorado, created a hubbub when it announced that 28% of Boulder school children were reading below grade level. Okay, so here's an example of something where you have to watch out. So they concluded that methods of teaching reading needed to be changed. The announcement was based on reading tests on which 28% of school children scored below the national average for their grade. So what we want to know is, are they using the data properly? Okay, so think about that. It's based on 28% were below the national average. Okay, so this is on one of those standardized tests and all that kind of stuff. So actually the answer is no, this doesn't make sense to report it like this. Just because they're below the national average does not mean that they're below grade level, right? So the conclusion that the school board made was here, and that's not accurate. So what if the national average was that everybody, national average was, they read it at a 90% competency level, okay? So if you have 72% of your people who are at or above the national average, then that means that 72% of your people are at 90% competency level, okay? And your 28% might be below that 90% average or competency level, but that doesn't mean that they're below grade level. Okay, the grade level might be way down here. You don't know enough there to draw that conclusion and to make that statement. So it's actually unethical for them to report it that way. Now, if they had said 28% of our students are below the national average, and we would like to make that not so we want our students to be at the national average or above, okay, that's fine. But that doesn't mean they're below grade level. So there's actually a different test or a different cut score, so to speak, that's the grade level. Maybe, and I would guess, 70% competency would be a pass, right? That would be grade level. So if all of these students in this 28% are still above the 70%, you might have 100% who are reading at or above grade level. Okay, so it doesn't make sense for them to report it that way. So you just have to watch out that you are reporting things accurately whenever you do this. All right, I think that's all for this section, and it's a short section. So we're going to make another video and make another short section, I think. Thank you. Have a great day.